Hello and welcome to a lecture on role of public policy in administration, statutory corporations and public sector undertakings. Now, before we proceed into the administrative, the statutory corporations and public sector undertakings, let us understand the primary concern with regards to public policy and why is public policy so important for a robust country like India. What are the parts of public policy? What are the various dimensions of public policy and the significant role that it plays in the nature and functioning of the government? Now, if we go by the definition of public policy, the definition of public policy has been given by various authors and public policy academicians. However, the definition that we would be seeing are a couple of them, and we would interpret as to what public policy is and its significance. First off, Robert Eystone said, the relationship of government unit to its environment, whatever government chooses to do or not to do. Proposed course of action, government providing opportunities and overcoming obstacles to reach a goal. Thus, public policies are governmental decisions. But does it end here? Absolutely not. It goes a step ahead and sees as to how does the government function. So the manner in which a government function is determined on what policy the government of the day is applying. Now, it can be for various facets and for various reasons. Now, the relationship of the government with its environment means with its people, with the other bodies that are there in the government. There is a central government, there is a state government, then there are governments in the rural sector, the panchayats, so on and so forth. Now, how does this entire ecosystem work? This is the backbone where the public policy of the government comes into picture. Now, as it's mentioned in the last point of the slide, whatever the government chooses or to do or not to do. Now, this choosing of the government is not a one-day thing. This choosing of the government is based on a policy that it works upon. So it is the undertaking of the policy primarily, and then how the government actually thinks to act in a particular direction. That is what matters most in the public policy domain. Now, if the government wants to change a particular course of action, providing opportunities and overcoming obstacles to reach a goal, how will the government actually achieve? It is determined on the manner in which the government focuses its public policy to be. So the definitions may be quite small, but the interpretation of public policy is quite large. So if there is a question on how public policy is determined or what is the importance of public policy for nation building, it has a multi-dimensional approach because the entire functioning of the nation depends on the nature of the public policy and how the government of the day is planning out its public outreach. So public policy and public outreach, both of them, they play a significant role in this direction. Further, the activities that the government undertakes in order to provide various welfare schemes, it is again based on the ideology and how the government wishes to function. And every government around the world has a course of action. They do plan a course of action. Again, what is it based on? The public policy that it has determined that this is the policy that the government will be focusing on, or this is the manner. If suppose I'm the government, then the approach would be this is the manner in which I am going to give the welfare schemes to my people. It would be children centric, it would be women centric, it would be elderly people centric. The elderly citizens, they would be at the forefront of my policies. So all these are policy decisions. But to take these decisions, there is a wide range of institutional happening and people and brains that are involved. And this requires a very close interaction and relation between various governmental agencies. because policies may be thought in one person's mind, it can also be formulated by a few. But to implement the same policy, you require a large number of people. The large number of people eventually will go on and carry out the envisioned policy in the way it was thought and the same being implemented. Now, before we go ahead, let's understand the cardinal approaches and the differences between a policy and a decision. Now, policy is something that may be quite vague, may not be very firm, and it may not be there on paper. Now, policies are generally the dreams and ideologies and the direction in which a particular government plans to work out in a phased manner. Whereas a decision is a choice that is made from the alternatives that are available. Decisions are prompt, they are taken on a day to day basis. Policies are formulated, and on the basis of the policies, in the manner in which the policy is formulated, the decisions will be based on the policies. So one is acting as the back front, so one is playing at the back foot, and decisions they play on the front foot on a day in and day out basis. Policies include a series of decisions. Only then you can arrive at one particular policy that the government of the day decides to take it forward. Decisions, on the other hand, are single time actions. For instance, a decision taken by the collector of a particular district to plant trees on both sides of the road. Now, this is a decision, but it may be based on a policy that we will ensure that our people do not face any kind of difficulties. There is a rise in temperatures. We will ensure that if there are bypasses or if there are the common people who are walking on the footstep, they get tired. There are benches, there are proper footpath, and there are roads, and there are trees that provides a shade. So this is a policy initiative that is being taken care of by that one decision of the collector through a single time action. So policies form over a long period of time, over people coming together, deliberating, and then finally finalizing on a point. On the other hand, single time actions are one time taken actions. Policies are long term perspective. It may be to develop the nuclear program in India. Now, when the ISRO was being formulated, or when the space program was being formulated in India during the 1950s, there were debates from both sides. There was Professor Vikram Sarabhai who wanted that India leads into the space rush, that India also joins the space club. And there were other people in the cabinet and in the government who were focusing on the point that we and majority of the people in India do not have food, clean water, and shelter. So when you do not have food, water, and shelter, a proper shelter, why do we want to focus on things that are not currently important? But if we see what Professor Sarabhai or Dr. Sarabhai, who is known as the founding father of India's space program, what he started then today is a robust organization in our country, one of the leading space organizations in the world, the Indian Space Research Organization. India landing on the south pole of the moon on its third attempt is something that started then. That was a policy decision. This is an action oriented thing that's being taken. So, a long term perspective, and it was seen as India's space program is now being coming into time with the relevant time in being with the various kinds of missions that India is sending the astronauts into, or the space agency is involved in. For example, the Gaganyaan project that it has been involved in, they did the testing a few days back. So these are decisions that are being taken. We will do this and this and this and this date, but it is all based on a long term perspective. Now, policies are more comprehensive. On the other hand, decisions are comparatively limited in terms of time, period, and scope. As mentioned, decisions are time bound. You need to take a time bound decision. If there is a flood in a particular area, you need to take a time bound action as to we need to send the lifeguards, we need to send people from the rescue missions, we need to send the National Disaster Authority forces out there. If we need help of the armed forces, we need to send them. We need to evacuate people. This needs to be done on a fast paced manner. Decisions needs to be taken very quickly because you want the decisions to bear a result. Whereas policies are more comprehensive. Policies are more like, if there is a natural disaster, which are the forces which are actually going to be at the forefront to respond during the policy or to respond during a natural calamity. So if we analyze and if we see, policies in short are long-term planned projects, decisions are in and carried out during the same project by taking day in and day out, yes and no, or go ahead or don't go ahead. So the green and red flags. Now, policies are generally divided on a five broad categories. We would be touching upon them in detail. First being the substantive policy, second, regulatory policy, third, distributive policy, fourth, redistributive policy, fifth, capitalization. On the other hand, decisions are broadly classified into programmed and non programmed. So let's focus on the various types of policies that are there. Let's begin with substantive public policy. So, friends, a substantive public policy in general is for the general welfare and development of the society in whole. It sees the society as one collective being and works for the betterment of the entire community, of the entire area, and its base of operation is very large. Now, this is formulated keeping in view the character of the constitution, the character of the laws that are there, what kind of a country it is. For instance, US is a capitalist economy. Their substantive public policy may be to boost capitalism at max. On the other hand, there are socialist economies wherein they would boost on how the government can provide maximum welfare to the people. In India, which is a combination of both socialistic and capitalistic, our focus is on how do we encourage the capitalists and how do we also see that people are also taken care of their needs, and how do we push people so that they also have a chance to become a capitalist one day. So, a substantive public policy is generally very broad in nature. It takes the entire nation into consideration or all the people that are there into consideration. It deals with all the socio-economic problems that are there, the moral claims of society. Now, public policy also determines how your judiciary will function, is what kind of decisions will come out from a judiciary. For instance, if you go to India, there are a lot of litigation pending in various kind of courts, and if we see and analyze judgments, we would realize that the courts have been people centric. The decisions that have been coming out from court, we do recognize the rights of people a lot. For example, in a recent case in the state of Orissa, the Anil Agarwal Foundation versus the state of Orissa, the court, the apex court of the country, it sided with the people of Orissa. It sided with the residents of that particular land. The outline of the case is such that a particular tract of land was taken away by one big business house and they wanted to build a university. But the catch is that particular area was a natural heritage kind of place and it was very close to the sea and it was on the Puri Konark Creek. So it's a place that attracts a lot of people and wildlife as well. We can keep the people aside, but how can we keep wildlife aside? Now, in this matter, the High Court of Orissa was clear that the land should be given back to the people who actually reside there, who don't own there, but they protect the natural heritage of that place. Eventually, the private party appealed this order of the Orissa High Court before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, coming and taking the assistance of Article 14, realized that there has been a blatant abuse of power and the land should go back to the people. So, this is a substantive public policy wherein the people, the socio-economic problems of people, the moral claims of society are taken into consideration. Next, regulatory public policy. Now, this is concerned with the trade, finance, and business of a particular country. How would the economy of the country look like? What would be the public policy in which the economy of the country will function? How should trade be regulated in this category? How should businesses function and thrive? What are the various economic safety measures that the leaders or the economists who are involved in the economic policy making should take? What are the public utilities that we can provide? What are the financial aid we can provide to the people? The taxation regime, what should be the tax? How should it be formulated is all dependent, and how it works is based on the regulatory public policies. Now, these are done by independent organizations that work on behalf of the government. For example, in India, we have the LIC. We have the Reserve Bank of India, that is the regulator of your financial system. You have your state electricity board. You have your state transport corporations. You have SEBI, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, that regulates the market in India, that regulates how will the share market be. It ensures that there is no malified activity in the share market. Then there is the IRDA that looks at the insurance sector. How will the insurance policies be? And it also looks as to it does not go on with the malified intent to actually harass individuals in that regard. Now, this is with regards to the regulatory policy that focuses on the economic front, because these are something that helps in the nation building. Next, the distributive public policy. This is meant for specific segments of the society. It gives public assistance and welfare programs. Now, what are the kind of specific segments in the society? It can be young girls below the age of 18. It can be one particular community that has been wronged since time. Now they are getting a special treatment from the government. It can be something, schemes for women or specific to children or elderly citizens, or something like education for the elderly. So this is covered under the social garb of the distributive public policy. For instance, we had the COVID pandemic. Now, the government took the decision once the vaccines were formulated. It took up the onus to ensure that every person in India would get a free vaccine in government hospitals, in the healthcare camps or institutes, or little establishments that are there in the villages. So, this is with regards to the distributive public policy, where it looks at the larger picture as to how to assist one particular section of the society. Why? Because they may require that. They may not be able to come up at par with all the other sections of the society. So, the adult education program may be for specific targeted individuals. Food relief during a natural calamity, again for a specific kind of people. Social insurance. For example, in India, we have the post office. The post office runs various kinds of social insurances. Anyone can go there and open and invest their money in various kinds. And there are various programs through the government, the Pradhan Mantri Dhan Raj Yojana, something of this kind. There are so many such examples where the distributive public policy focusing on specific sectors of the government is there in existence. Then we have the redistributive public policy. Out here, the focus is on rearrangement of policies for basic social and economic changes. So, the outreach is for public goods and welfare services disproportionately divided, and how the same can be streamlined. So, this looks for rearranging policies. Why? Because one particular segment has already benefited from it, and now it is time for the government to look beyond this and see how this can grow further. Then we have the capitalization public policy. The capitalization public policy mostly provides financial subsidies granted by the union to state and local governments. Now, there are various schemes of the central government wherein they provide subsidies to the state governments and the local governments for them to take loans, for them to take various kinds of initiatives for the welfare of the people in that particular state. And these subsidies are granted by the central and state undertakings or some important spheres if necessary. And they may be different in nature. For instance, in various states in India, the farmers get a lot of financial subsidies when they want to expand their scope of work. For example, a farmer who has been doing paddy farming, if he wants to get into fish uh, cultivation, there are subsidies from the government wherein they provide a lot of subsidy for that farmer to build a artificial pond wherein he can actually start harvesting fishes. Now, if there is a farmer who wants to start a small transport business, he would want to buy, say, two mini trucks or one mini truck. There are institutes, there are the government banks, there are cooperative banks who provide loans to these individuals. So, this is with regards to the capitalization of public policy, wherein the center focuses that your local governments give this thrust to the people where they have the confidence to take the things further and ensure that they also rise up from their conditions. Now, as we have seen the various kinds of policies that are there, the various kinds of policies that are there, let us see. And by now, we must have understood the nature of public policy. But what if there is a specific question on the nature of public policy? How should the answer be written? The answer should be written in a pointer format, elaborating on each point, highlighting the point specifically and underlining the important part instead of writing it as one paragraph. So, if there is a question on the nature of public policy and focus on a few policies of the government that are giving emphasis to the social structure of the government. So, public policies are generally based on the constitution of the country or how the country's financial system or entire structure of the government is based upon. So, public policy will be goal oriented and it is concerned with specific goals. Every policy will have a specific goal. For instance, in India, before the upcoming of the Niti Aayog, we had the 5 year plans. So that was a large scale policy. There was a roadmap in which we would take the development of the country further. For instance, in the first 5 year plan, the thrust was on agriculture and dams, and therefore Pandit Nehru, India's first prime minister, he termed that dams are the temples of modern India. Now, this was a statement based on a policy that was implemented over the course of time by decisions. Next, second, policies they generally spell out the strategy on how to achieve a particular goal. And at that time, India was a young, independent, robust country. So it needed a particular game plan, it needed a road map in order to achieve the goals that it has set for itself. Next, public policy becomes an instrument to achieve a goal because you have planned a particular thing and now you are planning on how to execute it. So, to get things done, this is one of the best ways in which governments of countries can function. Fourth, formulated and implemented to attain the objectives for the ultimate benefit of the masses. As we had discussed previously, the outcome or the focus of a public policy is generally on its subjects. These subjects are the primary concern and the primary people who would be dealing with public policy on how it should be formulated. So the government's scheme will be focused for the masses. Next, it looks for the collective good of the greater number. It does not focus on individual or singular numbers, it focuses on larger people and larger numbers. And ultimately, government actually decides on how should it be taken further. It chooses its path to take it further. And this takes form in various kinds of ways through laws, the legislations that the government passes, the ordinances that the government comes up from time to time, the court decisions, the executive orders, and in general decisions of the government. So, this is the nature of public policy, but it is based on all of these. How should the law take course? How should the legislations be passed? What kind of bills are presented before the parliament? What kind of bills do they actually go on and make law? So the debate that takes place in a particular parliament also speaks a lot about the nature of public policy in general. Now, as we can see, public policy as is generally something that guides the government of the country on how the administration of the government should function. How should the various branches in the government function? The classes of issues that are there. If there is an issue that arises within the government department, how should it be resolved? This may seem as something as an adjudicating process, but it is more on the lines of how the same should actually be administered and reached at a particular conclusion. This entire process is formed at the backdrop of something that is the policy at large, the policy decisions. How are the policies? What are the policies of the government? And how does it actually look forward to implement the same? Now, policies, it depicts the concern of the government. When you analyze the various policies of the government, you can understand what kind of government it is. What is it the government is actually trying to cover up, or what is it the government is actually trying to achieve? And it shows that what are the problems the government is focusing on, which is by far one of the most important element in public policy. It also involves the action to a particular problem, and it is backed by the sanction of law and authority. Now, negatively, there are decisions that do not take any action on a particular issue. You do have a roadmap, but at times decisions do not take place in that same manner. So, that is a time when policies of the government, even if they are robust and very strong, sorry, they do not come into the forefront. That becomes slightly a dangerous issue in this regard. So, your policies may be robust, but you also need it to be accompanied by robust decisions on a day in and a day out basis. Now, the scope of public policy, now determined by the kind of role that the state adopts for itself in society. The scope of public policy is for policy formulation and policy adoption. You have policy implementation, policy education, policy evaluation, and policy maintenance. Now, what are these various facets and how do they actually make an important part in this? So, the first step in public policy is the formulation of the policy, wherein the brains are actually mining, wherein they are contributing and they are working to formulate a particular policy. For example, we have a scheme of the government of India on the Atmanirbhar Bharat. Now, this is a scheme of the government of India, the self-reliant India. Now, there needs to be a formulation for the policy. So, there will be people who would be involved to formulate a policy as to how the government will take forward the idea of a self reliant India. Now, a group of people will research and formulate this policy. Once the policy is formulated, it will be presented to the government, wherein the government will analyze the policy. If it is good, it will then adopt it. Now, once the adoption of the policy is done, the same needs to be implemented. How is the policy implemented? Through various rules, ordinances, legislations. It is up to the government. Now, once the policy is implemented, the policy also needs to be preached to the people. This is where policy education comes in. Now, the outreach of the government policy has taken place, so the government will actually approach various people and the various masses of different categories. It will see as to which segment of the society will benefit from this policy, and it will, in a similar manner, focus or give its thrust to those kind or to those category of people. Then, once the policy education is done, the government will analyze as to how the policy is being received by the people, and then you have policy maintenance. So it's the six broad steps in which your policy actually functions. Now, going through each of them in detail. Policy formulation: government identifies a problem or a sector, and it calls upon the masses, from people's representatives, people from the media, pressure groups, broad ideology of the ruling party, and how the same can be aligned with the ideals of the constitution. Thus, in a democratic setup, the government forms its own policies. As we say, people assist, and eventually the government focuses and builds up its own policy. Next, it responds to organized groups through these policies. Now, every country or every policy generally has a pressure group behind it that is actually pushing the policy forward for the government of the day to actually go ahead and accept the policy. Why? Now, the reasons can be multitude. Now, let us see at the process in which the policy does come into existence. The first is identification of policy problem. Now, there is a policy, we will identify how the problem has come into existence. Then we will be setting up the agenda. How will the agenda be set up in case this concern is there? So the government has identified a problem. Now it is setting up an agenda. Now, once the agenda is set up, the formulation of the government response will take place, and it will also focus on the targets and decisions in that same regard. Once these are achieved, the policy process formulation kicks in, and eventually a policy comes out. So, in essence, what are the three major components of a policy formulation? If this is a question, these are the broad parameters in which the answer will be written. The answer can be written in a flowchart manner as well. So setting of goals and objectives is very essential for a policy and the objective. Second, the strategy for its implementation is equally important. And third, determination of the implementation machinery. So, under the setting of goals and objectives, the problems will come in. Why is this policy required? What would be the broad objective of this policy? And what is the goal that the government is eventually trying to achieve would come under this sector? You can give various examples with the concerns that are going on in India. For instance, the example that we just discussed with regards to the Atmanirbhar Bharat. Then you have your strategy for implementation. How will you be implementing this policy once it comes into picture? Once that stage is completed, then you need to see the implementing machinery. How will the implementing machinery be taking this policy forward to the masses, and how will the masses actually reciprocate to this policy? So the stage of policy design is where the choices are made from a coherent framework. There are a lot of things, and in a funnel approach, it all boils down and narrows down to one. It determines the integration of various factors and resources to achieve the objectives in this regard. It also identifies interlinkages and interdependencies among personal and material positions. Now, if the policy is inadequate, it can be amended or it can be substantiated with something at a later point in time. The influence, implementation, and performance of a policy. And this can emanate from internal government and external sources. So, in a sense, if we see development of a policy framework, or in short, a policy design, is a circle connected with arrows. Motivation of policymakers, political and professional insights, development of a framework. There is a problem, you need a framework. You need your pressure group to push the policymakers. The policymakers will push it through various people. Then the political professional insights will come into it. The industry insights will come into it. And then eventually a decision in that regard will be taken. Thus, it goes on and builds up and very important segment and see how policy design comes into picture. Thus, public policy does not only begin when a government comes into power, it also comes into picture as to how they have been functioning in the past. Next, policy adoption. How is a policy adopted? Now, a policy is adopted via the enactment of regulations or legislation for its implementation. Parliament, Parliamentarians get involved. It involves the state machinery in case of a national policy. Now, there is the water policy in India. Now, it said it is a vision document on how actually every household in India will receive a tap connection, a water connection. How will it receive the same? Now, this is a policy initiative, the National Water Policy of 2012, I suppose. Now, this policy is backed by the Jal Jeevan mission of the government. Now, under the Jal Jeevan mission of the government, it is the mission of the government to provide every household with a fully functioning, clean tap water. Now we see the policy, the national water policy, then we see the mission that the government undertook, and then the government undertook the decision to give water to every household. Thus, it is a cycle in which every machinery of the government gets involved. And every machinery, by essence, means that right from the people who actually start the policy to the executive officers or the members who will actually be implementing these policies, they are also given capacity building training so that they know how to implement such large scale visions and projects. So policy adoption is more about the implementation and pre-implementation side of it, as to how things will have to fall into place, what kind of preparation the government needs to make, what kind of training should various departments of the government be involved in, what kind of training should they actually take forward. Then we have policy implementation. Policy implementation requires clear coordination across government and non-government agencies. Because taking the example of the Jal Jeevan mission itself, it is not only that the government will be able to provide a fully functioning tap connection if it just passes a policy. You need non-government agencies, you need private contractors who would actually lay down the pipe connection, who will establish the tank, who will go ahead and enter into various contracts on behalf of the government and for the government, but for the people. So with the government, but for the people. But does it all end here? Now, this seems like a perfectly well documented, well planned policy outreach, but that is not the case every time. There are times when there is a failure. Now, the reasons for these failure are quite different and they may vary. For instance, political motivations at every stage of implementation. Now, as we know, in India, we have a central government and a state government. Now, this is a policy that every household should get clean drinking tap water, or a fully functioning tap water. The same will not be realized if there are conflicts in the political functioning of that state or that particular district. So the governments also need to work in a unanimous and unified approach. Now, this hampers the autonomy and flexibility of implementers in accomplishment of various tasks, because such large projects, they would require the government to take a lot of permissions and the government to give a lot of permissions to the non-government agencies. For example, contractors would require the permission to dig the road, to lay down the pipelines, and this needs to be passed by the government. So if there is no collaboration between the government and its agencies, there is a little tussle for the non-government agencies to fulfill these kind of work and criterias. Then, bureaucracy, lacunae in necessary professional skills. Now, there are many procedural delays. As we all know, at times files get stuck for months and months and they are not cleared. So, this ensures that the policy is not being taken into proper action through decisions. Then there is lack of resources on the personal front, financial and technical front, then lack of response from target groups. Now, if you do not get the required assistance or the required support from the people, it is very difficult to bring such policies into reality. It is very difficult to take such decisions and to accept such decisions from people.